How's it going, guys? I'm Robert from Machado Visuals, and large format acquisition is all the rage nowadays. So I really wanted to see how two of the biggest names in cinema stack up against each other. So I got together with my buddy Brandon to see how his Red Raptor compares to my Mini LF. Here are a few side-by-sides in a controlled environment and see if you can spot the differences between the two. Now, I'll be honest, if I were doing this blind test, I'd be pretty hard-pressed in telling which camera is which, but camera 1 is the Mini LF, and camera 2 is the Red Raptor. One of the biggest differences I noticed were how these cameras render skin tones. The Raptor feels much warmer with a bit more saturation, and the LF feels a little bit more neutral. We shot one scene at 1600 ISO to get a sense of how the image feels when bumping the camera one stop, and the Mini LF has a really beautiful fine texture that makes it feel a lot like grain, while the Raptor looks remarkably clean but with more of a blotchy noise pattern. We also did a quick latitude test of the two, and this is where you can really start seeing the differences. Now, full disclaimer, we used a few different NDs on the under test for the sake of time, so those color results aren't 100% accurate and should be taken with a grain of salt. For the Mini LF, we used the internal 1.8 ND while we used a Schneider Rhodium on the Raptor. Looking at the over test, the Mini LF starts to lose our talent skin tone at just under 7 stops, and even when we're at 7 stops over, the Alexa holds most of its color information beautifully. The Raptor, on the other hand, starts to lose talent at just over 5 stops over and just loses a ton of saturation as those channels clip. You can even see the red marker on the slate disappear as we move into those higher ranges. For underexposure, there's a pretty steep fall off at around 4 stops under, and again, the Alexa colors maintain their consistency throughout the range and didn't really skew any particular direction, while the red seemed to skew towards green and magenta. I was actually really surprised with how well the Raptor handled underexposure. It felt like it had a stop on the Alexa before the background started falling apart, albeit with less color information. Looking at the two side by side, you can really see how well the Airy holds its color information throughout both tests. By the way, if you want to see the full Latitude test, I'll leave a link in the description. In terms of ergonomics, Brandon's Raptor was in more of a handheld configuration, and it was really cool using such a small body. The overall footprint is much smaller than the Mini LF without the compact bridge plate and rear accessory bracket, so I could see this being really handy when you need to rock a smaller rig or if you need to mount the camera in even tighter spaces. One thing I did miss from the Alexa were the user buttons and the ability to control the camera from the operator side or even from the EVF. If I wanted to change a particular setting on the Red, I would need to go over to the smart side and look at the screen, which gets a bit difficult and borderline annoying if you don't have an AC.
So for this shoot, we kind of decided to flip cameras for this first one. So you shot primarily with just the Raptor, both on sticks and then going handheld with it. What was your experience using the Raptor?
Well, I could tell you, at least handheld, I really think it's very much so designed for kind of that traditional like Canon experience where the camera's kind of just right in front of you. It did get a little bit heavy. It was kind of like a little quick 5-minute pump. But since it's really dense, and once you kind of have all the things on it, all that weight does add. I did feel the micro jitter myself, but I also felt that a lot of that was smoothed out just because of the weight. So I think it's really, really well designed for operating kind of in front of you. I thought it was, it's great. It's red, you know?
I thought the Alexa was great. I mean, initially when I first picked it up, I realized quickly, I was like, man, if I can get this thing on my shoulder, this is gonna make it a lot easier.
It's not a camera you're gonna be...
No, it's mini, but it's not all that mini. I mean, it's a very heavy, it's a pretty heavy camera, but I mean, quite honestly, there was a couple of little features that I liked instantly. Obviously, the EVF on it is really good, and having that second or that, I guess, third point of contact, I think really helped with my shot. One thing that was really interesting that I really liked was the digital leveler that was inside, because at one point I was going and I know that my shot was getting a little crooked and I was like trying to figure out where level was, and you just kind of whispered in my ear and let me know where to find it. And once I had it locked in, it was a nice little extra feature. So little things like that. I thought it was a great camera to work with. Obviously, being able to throw it on my shoulder made it a lot easier to work with. But I mean, when we're looking at the footage side by side, I honestly think both cameras really cut together pretty good.
Yeah, they hold up super well. And obviously we're talking about two completely different rig setups. Like mine is obviously more shoulder oriented. Yours is obviously much more handheld in front of the body. So it ultimately depends on what you're doing. And for, I think, your setup, I think it would really thrive with like probably the RF glass and lighter lenses, something that's not like quite as chunky as like a cinema lens or something like that.
But that's the nice thing about both these cameras. You can just rig them up however you need to.
Yeah, and it still works too. Like throw that on like a little easy rig, and you know, I'll do that all day. So because I love operating also too, just right in front of my body. So. Yeah, it ultimately depends on what you're doing and kind of what your shooting style is. Hopefully this video was helpful in some way. Of course, there are other reasons why I'd pick one camera over another, but overall, I think a lot of YouTubers hype up full frame formats a little bit too much nowadays. Shallow depth of field is often perceived as cinematic, but it can actually become distracting and oftentimes breaks my suspension of disbelief. But if it's used as a creative decision, it can really help serve your story. Better Call Saul moved towards the LXL to further use depth of field as a creative tool, while Red Bull's media house wanted to use the Raptor's large sensor to capture the grandeur of a Formula One car racing through the streets of New York. By the way, that Red Bull video is absolutely bonkers, and shout out to Checo for winning Monaco. There's no doubt that there's been a trend towards large format and full frame. Sony has the FX9 in Venice, Arri with the Alexa 65 and LF models. Canon has the newer C500, and Red with the Raptor and Monstro. Large format has become a really compelling option for many cinematographers, and some say that large format doesn't really have a look, but I definitely think that it does. Choosing a format usually derives from the context of the material and making sure that it fits the story, and I think it means different things for different people. For James Laxton, it provides a sense of immersion and brings the audience in close proximity to emotionally connect with the story, while for Roger Deakins, large format feels most natural and closest to what his eye sees. It's important to remember that large format isn't necessarily better or worse than Super 35 acquisition, it's just another tool to add to the tool belt. Even Arri's new Alexa 35 reflects the importance of Super 35 and is pushing the boundaries of digital acquisition. So I've always been a really big fan of Arri and their imaging philosophy, and that kind of, for me, boils down to three things, which are its intuitiveness, its reliability, and ultimately image quality. For me, the Mini LF has a level of brilliance and fidelity that just scales really well with the type of commercial work that I tend to do, and it just checked the most boxes in terms of what I really want in a camera.
So for me, getting into Raptor actually started with originally why I jumped into Red to begin with. So my initial entry into Red was with the Red Komodo, and the thing I liked most about the Red Komodo at the time was the fact that it was a very cost-effective camera that allowed you to get all of the benefits of Red RAW. Working with the VistaVision sensor and the RAW footage is easy. I love coloring it, and quite honestly, it's a camera that I continue to want to keep working with and discovering the best ways to use it.
Special thanks to Brandon for coming down to Vegas for a few days and getting involved. Be sure to check out his video, which is linked down in the description. It was really neat seeing how these two cameras are different, but also how they're a lot more similar than you would think. If you have any questions on this video, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.